Alrighty. Well, welcome back to the Daily Theologian Podcast. I am your host, Noah Cantrell. And before I get started really quick, I wanted to say, for those of you that have been interested, we are now on the various platforms, so Apple and Spotify and things like that. So if you've been looking for it, you can now find it. It wasn't there for the first couple weeks, but just so everybody's aware. Now, today, I am joined by a very special guest. This is something that I came across online. Thank you to Tim Stratton, who I will have on here pretty soon. I came across this story of a gentleman who's joining me today named Andy Koons. And thank you for joining me today, Andy. The story is that Andy was led to Christ through Chat GPT. Now, this sounds pretty interesting, and so I wanted to get him on here to discuss it and talk about what that looked like, how that happened, things like that. So, thank you for joining me, Andy. And so, what I would like to do is just start with, could you introduce yourself, where you're at, what you're doing, like what, kind of maybe some background leading up to these things. Just tell us about yourself.
All right. So I am Andy Koons. First of all, Noah, thank you very much for having me on. I do appreciate it. It's been really cool the last couple days because I've, this is the second podcast that I've been a guest on where I'm able to sort of go and talk about these things. And it's been something that's been on my mind, pretty much every day for the last 2.5 months. So to give you the shortest, most concise version of it, and we can go deeper into it. I'm a pastor's kid who was kind of, I think calling me a lukewarm Christian is the best descriptor for it. For the first 25 years of my life, I sort of cut myself off from anything spiritual whenever I was 25 by, sort of proclaiming to myself that I didn't believe in any of this stuff, and that came after years of, I don't know if deconstruction is the right word, because I'm not even familiar with how a lot of Christians use that word. But for me, I was just thinking about all the things that I knew as a pastor's kid who grew up in church, like, and asking myself if I believed in it. And, one of the first ones was like, well, I don't think Noah's Ark actually happened. And, well, I don't think Adam and Eve were real people. And then that grew into, I'm asking myself, like, do I actually really believe that God is real? And that question was asked in sort of a period of time in my life of 2 or 3 years that were really the lowest points of my life. And I could not get myself to say yes. And so for 11 years after that, I was a self-proclaimed atheist. I was I was not one of these atheists, and I don't have anybody that I can really think of as like an example to point to, but I'm not somebody who was like, well, I believe in God, I'm just not a Christian, or I was a hardcore atheist, like as hardcore as you can get. I used to pick fights with Christians on the internet. I one thing, unfortunately, about me that I love to do is I love to argue on the internet. So whenever I became an atheist, I ingested as much atheist content as I possibly could. And I learned all the arguments. I learned all the counter arguments. I mean, where I learned how to, I really shouldn't call it debating. It's not really debating. It's just where I learned how to like argue online is from all of this atheist content. And so from there, like I spent 3 or 4 years just really militantly angry, in my atheism. And from my perspective at that time, it was like, well, the first 25 years of my life I felt like were one long sustained lie, and so that's where a lot of that anger came from. And so, it was me reacting as like a, hey, big fu to, hey, you know what, you guys lied to me for all this time. And so it's all that anger had to go somewhere, and so it came out as horrible and obnoxious Reddit atheist behavior online. um and after 3 or 4 years, it finally got to a point where, like, my sort of online rhetoric was affecting my wife's life. There were people who stopped talking to her, because I would go online and I would try to think of the most offensive anti-Christian, rhetoric I could think of. And there were people who were just like, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you, like, blasphemy was like an everyday thing for me. So I well, I finally got to a point where I'm like, well, maybe I need to stop being such uh a horrible person to these Christians, so that way it doesn't negatively impact my family, um and so I had to ask myself, I was like, okay, well, do I believe in God or not? And the answer is no, because a lot of that militant phase was I was deeply engaged with the question, is God real? And I was staunchly defending the no position and angrily defending the no position. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, well then, if I think that I have the answer to that question, then I just need to settle with that and move on. And so I sort of develop my own personal mantra around it, which was, um I have not seen the evidence that I have not, the evidence that I have seen is not substantial enough to support a belief in a god or gods. I said that word for word for years. And that was like, that was my belief system right there, and that worked for me. And then I stopped getting in all these fights, and I, um you know sort of the political climate at that time had a lot to do with that also, because my Christian parents, who are right-wing conservatives, the sort of online crowd that I was identifying with, the super super left-wing atheists, um wanted me to believe that my parents are Nazis, and they're not. I grew up with them. They're very good people. They don't have an ounce of real hatred in their heart. And so that was something that I couldn't get with. And so as I sort of distanced myself from that crowd, the more I just realized that I could not stand them whatsoever. And one of the one of the more impactful experiences that I had, I used to be on Reddit a lot, and I I was on there, and I said, or I saw this meme. Do you remember those billboards where it would show like a message from God? It was an all black billboard, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
those always crack me up.
yeah. So,
It's like you
uh,
asked for a sign, and it was like,
yeah. So I remember seeing a meme that was posted, and this was back in, I don't know, 2016, 2017 or something. But I remember a meme got posted, and it showed a picture of Friedrich Nietzsche, and it said, God is dead, Friedrich Nietzsche. And then it showed one of those billboards, and it said, Nietzsche's dead, God. And I, even as an atheist, I was like, that's hilarious. That's funny. I don't care what somebody's like personal, religious or political or anything beliefs are. If they say something funny, like, funny, if something's funny, it doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are. Funny is funny,
yeah, you got to be able to laugh at your own side.
exactly. And so I saw that, and I was like, that's great. And I went into the comments, and it was just every fedora hat wearing atheist in a billion-mile radius was like, "This is not funny," blah blah blah. And I was I commented it, and I was like, objectively, it's funny. You guys need to calm down. And so then I got all these hate comments, stemming off of my comment with all these bullet pointed. It's the most autistic thing I've ever seen. All these bullet pointed reasons, like, actually, here's why it's not funny, blah 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 blah. And I was looking at it, and as somebody who really appreciates comedy and humor, like I used to do stand up comedy a long time ago, but I was looking at it and I was like, these guys are losers. They can't take one joke. These guys are losers. And so I was just like, I don't want to be associated with these people. So I was an atheist who kind of separated myself from the atheist crowd. And it was during that time where I was just like, I don't identify with these people. I didn't want to be um I didn't want to be a Reddit atheist anymore, you know? And so, in terms of spirituality and religion, I moved into more neutral territory, and it was much nicer. It was much nicer just being like, you know what? If you believe in God, who cares? You're a good, you're a good dude, you're a good woman or whatever. Like, I don't care, you know? And that's how I spent the next, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, just being cool as a cucumber. But as I mentioned before we started recording, we we had to start going to church. My oldest son, who is autistic, not an atheist, um, he um he was getting bullied really bad in our local public schools, and so we put him in the local Christian school because it was to the point where I was like, I don't care if it's Christian or not, you know. Um, and so we put him in that school. He did great. He was flourishing. Um, and even before we had put him in that school, he had told us um, that he was a Christian. And this is something that I've always, excuse me, sorry, I've always found to be significant because as as I think that skepticism is treated like a naughty word. Um, in certain Christian circles, but I don't think it is. I think skepticism is a very, very important thing that everybody should have,
Yeah.
and it's a tool, it's a logical tool that can be used, and it teaches you to think critically. So whenever I was growing up, there wasn't any choice in what my beliefs were. It was always, this is what you believe in, and that was done with the best of intentions, but the downside of that is, well, when something else comes around that might be shinier or prettier looking than the thing that I'm told I have to believe in, then I'm going to run towards that,
Hmm. Now,
so
did you was it growing up where was it open to questions and getting answers to some of those hard things? Because I can understand on one side being like, no, this is what we believe as a family, but then also being open to that genuine curiosity and skepticism and
mhm,
questions because there's big questions.
mhm. Yeah, so it you know there was sort of an unwritten understanding that you don't really stray too far ideologically, um and you don't really ask a lot of tough questions. It was never explicitly said, like, I never had an experience of where I was like, what about Darwinian evolution, and someone goes, don't ever bring that up, like, there was never anything like that, but it was just kind of understood because I grew up in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And so it wasn't just that I went to church 3 times a week. It was my neighbors were Christians, their neighbors were Christians, and it was just, you could just kind of feel it in the air. And
it was an atmosphere of this
yeah.
is what we believe. You don't really question that.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're probably going way off course, and
Yeah.
that's looked down upon. Now, I
Yeah.
understand what you're talking about. I definitely. My family was not like that, but I've been a part of groups and circles that has kind of been the mentality. So I understand, and I know a lot of people that have come out of really bad situations like that. And
Hmm.
what tends to happen is you have these questions that get unanswered either because you can't ask them, or when you do ask them you get bad answers. And so then whenever somebody comes along with a seemingly good answer, well, that's where you're going to
Exactly.
go. That's you're
Yeah.
going to go where the answers are.
Yeah.
And so that's an indictment on a lot of Christianity and a lot of Christian families too, parents and churches and things like that, that they have this kind of anti-intellectualism where it's like, no, don't question that, don't
Hmm.
challenge that, that's dangerous, and they get kind of scared. But what happens is, it's funny because it almost becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy in a sense.
Yeah.
They're afraid that, oh, if you're questioning these things, then you're going to end up way off, as an atheist or something like that, because you're questioning these things too hard. And what ends up happening is, because they don't give those answers, then those people do end up leaving the faith or leaving what they grew up learning. And then everybody looks at it and goes, oh, see, it's because they were questioning things. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it's because you didn't go give the answers they needed.
Right.
And so that's something I always encourage, families and individuals and churches, especially, is you have to train your young people why you believe what you do. It's not just
Exactly.
enough that they know this is what we believe. Well, why?
Yeah.
What are the reasons? What's the good evidence for
and
it?
and that's something that I've always been driven to, like on a intellectual level, is like I want to know why I believe what I believe in,
Hmm.
and I wasn't, I didn't really have enough life experience or wisdom to really understand that enough to put it into those words. But I just you know especially when I was growing up, I just felt like there was something linoleum about it, if that makes sense, um where it was just made to look shiny, but there's no actual substance, um and I think that comes from, I was raised in an environment where there were a lot of bumper sticker phrasing or phrases, um meant to be used as like, okay, uh here's an example. One of my favorite, least favorite, um sort of Christian pieces of rhetoric is, listen, it's not a religion, it's a relationship.
Hmm.
To the uninitiated, that sounds really dumb,
Yeah.
because you're looking at it and you're like, Christianity is the biggest religion on planet Earth, like it is a religion. But
Hmm.
in the context that I'm looking at it now, as somebody who went through 11 years of atheism, had this crazy or not paranormal, but supernatural encounter, and it was made like abundantly clear to me that not only is there a God, but nothing in the universe makes sense if there's not a God. And also, I know what God it is, like having that sort of an experience, looking at that same thing now, and also going back and starting to read scripture for the first time in probably 20 years, um and then looking at it with the set of eyes that I have now, because after I had that experience, and I'll go deeper into that too. After I had that experience, I was like, well, I want to start fresh with the Bible. And so in in my mind, I was like, well, I want to get straight to Jesus. I want to go run right to Jesus. And so I started with the book of Matthew, went through all of the New Testament, and then I went back and started the Old Testament. And the one of the things that I've picked up on is that, you know what, the guardrails that God puts up in my life are not going to be the same as the guardrails he puts up in your life. There's going to be things that I struggle with that you don't struggle with, or things that put distance between me and God that don't put distance between you and God. There are some things that will put distance between anybody and God, like heroin. you know, like Paul, I mean, one of the most consistent things that Paul said or Paul talks against is sexual immorality. So things like there's some of these things that are just blanket, you know what, don't do this because these will
Mm-hmm.
put that division between you and God. And but there's a lot of other things like, you know what, um I don't think drinking a beer um is going to get anybody sent to hell. But for certain people, they can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those people where, you know, I've never struggled with alcoholism. I've never struggled with addiction to alcohol. But one of the things that I felt led to do after my conversion is stop drinking. And so that's something that I did, you know. Um and it could be that, you know what, I've already done I'm not, I don't know, this might come out wrong or weird, but you know, I've already done 2 podcast appearances about this experience that I had, and it seems to be garnering a lot of interest. And so, you know what? Maybe it's not a good idea for me to be seen with a beer, you know, because there could be somebody that maybe they saw my TikTok, maybe they saw this show right here and they were struggling with some of the questions that I had, but they see me with a beer in my hand. I don't know. It just
Mm-hmm.
kind of changes that, you know?
You're naturally wanting to uh, uh, minimize, the wrong perception or stumbling blocks for people that maybe do have this idea that,
Mm-hmm.
a Christian should never be X, Y, or Z. That may or may not be biblically accurate or true, but you want to minimize those potential stumbling blocks that might prevent somebody else
Mm-hmm.
from
Well,
what you're talking about. Is that what you're
and
saying?
yeah, I mean, with the drinking, like I definitely felt led to quit drinking, you know. Um and with swearing, that's another thing that, you know, I think for some people it can be sinful, and for some people it's not, you know. I'm not a theologian. I don't want to prop myself as an expert or something. This is just how I'm understanding my reading of New Testament scripture, you
Mm-hmm.
know, is that, you know what, it's going to be different for different people, you know. I think that's um anyway, the I've got horrible ADHD and I forgot the larger point that I was going to make. Um, anyway, kind of going back to the critical thinking skepticism thing. You know, that's something that I sort of baked into raising my kids. I've got 3 boys, and I taught all of them that, you know what, if somebody makes a claim, ask for evidence. You know, and I would in sort of a silly way, you know, kind of mess around with them. There was one time at our apartment, there was a police car with its siren on, and I told the boys, I was like, well, finally found me, you know, and they were like, all right, dad, you know. And so I kind of mess with them a little bit like that, you know. And in my mind, on a deeper level, I'm I'm kind of trying to like, iron sharpens iron kind of thing, you know. Um, I'm trying to get them to exercise that muscle, you know, of like,
Mm-hmm.
somebody says something ridiculous, ask for evidence, you know, and teaching them that, seeing them use that in real time, and then all 3 of them coming up to me, who they know is an atheist. Because I've never been quiet about that, but I've always been careful not to tell them that what I believe is the truth. You know, I've always been careful about that. But all 3 of them came up to me and said that they believe that God is real. And so 3 boys that I know utilize critical thinking come up to me saying that's got to say something, you know?
How old were they?
My oldest, he's 14 now. He was probably, oh man, like 9, I think, about 9 years old whenever he told me that he was a Christian. And it was like, and we weren't going, he wasn't going to the Christian school at that time, you know. We weren't going to church. I don't think he had any Christian influence in his life other than maybe some other kid at school, you know? And so that that to me has always kind of like I've always looked at that as like a significant data point, you know? Um and so eventually all three of my boys told me that they were Christians. And so that, I mean, that was one of the things whenever he was getting bullied, we were like, well, he's a Christian. There's a Christian school right here in town. Let's go talk to them, you know, see how much it costs and go from there. And
Did that
eventually
ever
we,
did that ever bother you that you had this particular set of beliefs? I mean, it was not that you were agnostic towards, I don't know if there's a God. You, in your own words, you believed there was no God,
hmm
right? So, okay.
hmm
So then how did that make you feel that your boys were coming to a radically different conclusion than you?
so I, this is the timing of this. I had gotten out of that like lowest point in my life because let me tell you, the Andy of 2014 was not a good person, you know. Like, I wasn't a good husband, I wasn't a good dad. um it truly was the lowest point in my life, not just how I experienced life but how I just was as a person, you know. And I whenever I sort of hit rock bottom, just sort of looked at everything, and for the first time in probably all of my adult life, I was like, you know, a lot of this is my own fault, you know. And so I started going to therapy. I started working on myself, started getting my depression under control, started sort of really putting my own behavior under a microscope and picking that apart and seeing why my brain works the way that it works. I sort of set this North Star for myself that I want to be a good dad and I want to be a good husband, you know? Um, and so those are the goals that I started working towards. So by the time that my kids told me that I was a Christian, even then, you know, and that's probably 2017 or 2018. Even at that point in my life, um, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry. By the time we got them in the Christian school, I don't know. I didn't actually write all these dates down or something, but by the time we got them in the Christian school and by the time that they told us that they were Christians, like, I was really proud of them, you know, because number one, it it caught me off guard that they were like that. I can see them utilize critical thinking and then come to a different conclusion than I did, you know. And so, and that they were willing to tell me that they were willing. And I remember talking to my oldest about this, and I was like, you know what? I was like, you went up to your dad. You went up to your dad who doesn't believe in God, who has never been quiet about that. And you were like, oh, yeah, well, I do believe in God. I was like, man, that took balls, you know? And so there was a part of me, and it's just the warm, fuzzy, you know, chewy dad side of me where I was just like, man, you go, like, that's awesome, you know. I was really proud of them. I was proud of all of them, but my oldest was the one that was just like, yeah, this is what I believe, and I don't agree with you, you know. And he said that as like a 9-year old, you know. So, but like, even them going to the Christian school, and this is more sort of the politically philosophical side. But by the time that they were going to the Christian school, like, I had been on a crazy political journey as well. I started off my sort of atheist um era as a as basically a communist. Like, I was super super far to the left, you know. um and I was gradually getting further to the right as I grew up and as I watched my kids grow up and as I lived life and paid bills and paid taxes and, you know, worked my butt off. And I mean, there was a job where I was working like 80 hours a week consistently every single week, you know. And when you work that hard, when you see how much gets taken in taxes, you tend to not be so left wing, you know. And when you've got kids that you're raising and you're thinking about the society that they're going to grow up in, and you know, you want them to be safe growing up, and you know, left wing ideology doesn't permit you know, a lot of free thought in that area, you know. So I was drifting farther from left wing politics. And one of the things that, you know, I did come to the conclusion of is like, hey, you know what? You can look at, sitting here as an atheist, I can look at every other country in the world. And you know what? I'm thankful I live in a Christian country, because I wouldn't want to live in a Muslim country. I wouldn't want to live in a Hindu country. You can look at all the best and worst countries to live in, and some of the best countries on earth to live in have a have their roots in Christianity, you know. And
It's kind of like a Richard Dawkins making that statement recently. I don't know if you saw that, where he was talking about how nobody should be a Christian. He believes it's a false religion, but he really likes all the advantages of living in a Christian society. And so he considers himself to be a cultural Christian, whatever that's supposed to mean, in the sense that he loves all the benefits that come from it, but he thinks it's false and you shouldn't believe it. Right. So it's like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You want to live in this Christian society, and the society that has been built, and the principles and the have been fundamentally built on Christian principles and the Bible. And you want to say, no, it's false. I want to keep all those benefits, but I want to get rid of the God and the theology that gave those benefits to me. It's self-defeating. It's so bizarre.
So he wants to destroy Western society.
Yeah. But he wants to still enjoy the Western society. So it doesn't make any sense. For a smart guy, that was a pretty dumb thing to say.
Right. So anyway, I had reached a point where I was kind of in that same boat where, you know, I wasn't professing that people should stop believing. You know, I'd kind of moved past that phase in my life, but I was like, you know what, I'd rather my kids go to a Christian school than a secular one, because you know what, at least when they go in there, they're taught how to love other people, and they are taught a moral framework. And I was like, they're not going to get something like that. They're not going to get a moral framework that I approve of at a secular, you know, public school. They're going to get, I mean, I've got 3 sons. Someone's going to tell them that one of them's a girl, you know, and that's one of those things where I'm like, all right, I'm not okay with that, you know. So putting them in the Christian school, them telling me that they were Christians, a lot of that was a lot more easy than you would think, given my lack of belief in God, you know. But one of the things that was required of sending them to this school is that we had to regularly attend a church. So we started attending a local non-denominational here in town. It's where my wife's best friend went, and so we just, you know, went with them. It's a great church. As somebody who has had a lifelong struggle with mental health, like, it was nice once a week to just go and sit down. You know, our pastor's really funny. You know, that's something that I deeply appreciate. And so it was nice once a week to just go and sit down, have a few laughs, and just be surrounded by positivity, you know. And it felt great, you know, even though I was sitting there being like, I don't believe in a word of this, but you can just feel it in the air, you know, like everybody's happy to see you. Like there's 1,200 people that are like, good morning, you know, and with a smile on their face, like, it's great. You know, you walk in there, they've got a coffee shop, and I can go get a latte or something and a scone. And then just like I said before we hit record, it's like your brain is taking a shower. Actually, it's like your brain is taking like a nice bath, with candles and everything. And so being able to sort of unload every week like that, like it was a huge benefit. And as time went on, before I had my experience, um I did start getting these weird feelings of like sitting around and just being like, man, I wish I bought into this, because it looks fun, you know, it looks great. And but I still just, there was an uncrossable gap to me at that time, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. But I have a buddy named RJ Evans, which he, just a little shout out, he's a Christian, and he makes these t-shirts. He designs Christian t-shirts. It's called the Fallen Short, so you guys have to check that out. um he I would talk to him about it. He knew I was an atheist. He and I were both, libertarian anarchist type dudes, and that's how we got connected. But he's been a great friend for a few years now. But I would talk to him about it and be like, yeah, man, I wish I believed in this stuff. And maybe that sort of like um takes away some of the integrity of this story, but I don't know. It's true. Like I remember sitting there wishing that I thought any of this was real.
I mean,
So,
I don't think that takes away any of the integrity of it. I mean, there
mhm,
are people, everybody has a different journey, but I can think of some of the, probably one of the most famous, you know, uh, atheists right now would be somebody like Alex O'Connor, who just does not believe that there is a God. And yet he says all the time, I wish it were true. It would be really nice. It'd be convenient.
mhm,
It would be helpful. He goes, I mean, I wish I could be a Christian, but I can't. I don't believe it. And so I don't think that, I understand your concern there, but I don't think it removes the integrity there. I think it kind of like, we were just talking about Richard Dawkins. He sees the benefits that Christianity brings, but he doesn't believe it's true. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say he wishes it were true, but there, I don't think it's uncommon for people that don't believe it to still recognize, yeah, that works for
yeah,
some people. It's good for them. It's beneficial, and so in some sense, it's, I guess in some ways, a lot of people are on that kind of same, even if they're
yeah,
atheistic, they're kind of in that same boat there going, yeah, it would be nice if it were true, but it's just not.
yeah.
And
Okay, yeah, you're right. Um, well, fast forward to June of this year. All right, and
now I'm
I
really
was,
curious before you get
yeah.
to this. So you said you grew up in a, as a pastor's kid, right? Okay, so how did you go from that to being atheistic?
I grew up in the 90s. I was always surrounded with like new technology. There was always new things coming out. Um, and I always found that stuff fascinating. I watched the Discovery Channel and the History Channel, and back then I think they even had like the Science Network or something like that. I've always been into science. I love science. I love astronomy and astrophysics. Like these are really, really, and I've been that way for as long as I can remember. I used to go to the library with my mom whenever I was a kid, and I'd always have some VHS tape about, oh, this is how stars explode or something like that. Um, I've always found science fascinating. I've always been drawn to learning about that stuff. Um, well, I started listening to a lot of like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, and um because Bill Nye, especially in the new atheist movement, was just kind of making a resurgence. Neil deGrasse Tyson was growing in popularity. um and that Neil deGrasse Tyson made uh some good arguments. He talked about the God of the gaps argument, but he framed it with all these physicists who were trying to figure out the planet's orbits around the sun, and where Isaac Newton got to a certain point, couldn't figure it out from there. And so he goes, well, the rest is God, God, for whatever reason, just makes this orbit, atypical or something like that. Until another scientist comes along and he goes, oh, I actually figured out why this atypical orbit thing happens. And he's able to crunch the numbers to a certain point and then goes, well, beyond here, I can't figure it out. So it must be God. And then another scientist keeps, and then so on and so forth. It's the God of the gaps argument framed in that specific example is very compelling,
Basically, just God can easily fill in the gaps that we don't understand. And so therefore,
right.
if somebody's going to come along eventually and figure it out, well, then that's not evidence for God. That's just, they're just excusing their ignorance.
Right. Having influences in my life like that. Also, I was on Reddit all the time, and the atheist or atheism subreddit just dominated that website from like 2010 to, well, whenever, I don't know, 2016, around that time. For that whole time I was on Reddit every day, and I'd come across 20, 30 posts every day or every time I got on as I was scrolling from the atheist subreddit. And so it's that constant sort of trickling of atheist influence, sort of landing on me.
I'm sure your algorithms didn't really help either. When was this? When was this?
Well, I became an atheist in 2014, but I had been on Reddit ever since like 2010, 2011.
Okay. So this is around, when the algorithms really started kind of picking up and they'd recognize your interest in something and feed you more of that. This is right around that time. Man, when did Facebook start?
When was that? Like 2007? No, I think it was before
I think
then.
so. It was around the time of the iPhone.
That's when it went, like, because it started on
first started. Yeah. Okay, so the algorithms are gonna come in to play a little bit later. I don't know when those really started picking up, but needless to say, whenever that was, they're not helpful for things like this. Because typically, if you're looking for something, they're going to give you a whole lot of it and then not show you the other side.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So a lot of it just had to do with there was a lot of atheist influence in my life, and plus, I had this weird falling out with my family. I my first two kids were born out of wedlock, and so my family wasn't terribly excited about that. They didn't give me a lot of gruff or anything like that, but it was just, it was kind of unspoken, like, we're not too terribly happy about this. They've always been great to my kids. My parents made excellent grandparents, but I just started to distance myself from them too, and I think the distance that I had with the consistent Christians in my life. And also, I moved across the country, in early 2010, uh, to just a totally different culture. I was not in the Bible Belt anymore, and I wasn't surrounded by Republicans. I wasn't surrounded by Christians. There's Christians here, but just the density is not nearly like it was in Kansas, all that put together, I find myself thinking about this question of, do I believe in God or not? And just coming to a spot where I'm like, I really don't buy any of this, and there's not a specific event that really, actually, you know what, there was something that happened that was, if not the catalyst, it was one sort of catalytic, I don't know if that's a word, event that sort of eventually got me to this spot. But in 2009, Christmas of 2009, I was working at Starbucks at the time. I lived in a town called Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and my parents lived in Wichita, Kansas, and that's a 3 or 4 hour drive. Um, and so it was Christmas Eve, and I was supposed to drive to my parents' house that night. Well, there was this ice storm, and there was, no joke, there was like a 1/4 inch of ice on everything. Like, it was crazy. And so I couldn't drive home. I had this little Ford Ranger that weighed like 17 pounds. It got zero traction. And so my roommate, who was at that time, I mean, he was like my best friend, he had made it to his dad's house for Christmas. And so I was just alone on my apartment on Christmas Eve. It was like a Hallmark movie. And well, my boss, well, she was like a shift lead. She called me because she knew I was supposed to be driving home to my parents' house. She is a lesbian. And she called me. She goes, "Hey, I just wanted to make sure that you made it home safe." And I was like, "Well, actually, I wasn't able to drive home because the ice storm, it's too dangerous." And I could tell that she like got teary-eyed on the other end of the phone, and she was like, "Andy, are you telling me you're alone on Christmas Eve?" And I was like, "Yeah," because I was all bummed out too. And she's like,
I can say from experience that is actually a lot harder than somebody might think. Like,
"Yeah,
I mean, some people know, because they're with their family all the time. When I was in college, I tried to go home as much as I could for Christmas. And there was one particular Christmas that I remember I couldn't go home, and didn't go over to anybody else's house, or I was just by myself. And that, man, you see the photos, and texts and things of all the
yeah,
family getting together. That's hard. That can
oh
be
yeah,
really, really hard.
yeah." Yeah, that I was devastated. Well, I randomly got this call from my uh shift lead, and she was like, "You're alone on Christmas Eve?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm all alone." And she goes, "Well, do you want to come over to me and Jen's house?" That was her girlfriend at the time, and I was like, "I would love that." And so I hopped in my truck and I fishtailed my way through town. She lived about, I don't know, 4 or 5 blocks away, but I somehow made it to her house in one piece. And I spent Christmas Eve. I spent the night there, spent Christmas Eve. We stayed up all night watching Quentin Tarantino movies. And it was just, she made sure that I wasn't alone on Christmas. And it was one of those things where like I still am deeply grateful for that experience, just because I could have been alone. She didn't have to do that. She didn't have to do that at all. She could have called me and said, "Hey, just want to make sure you're safe. Oh, you're alone? Man, that sucks. All right, I'll see you next week or whatever." And even then I would have been like, "Yeah, I mean, that's fine." But no, she was like, "I want you to spend Christmas with me." And she knew I was a pastor's kid. She knew how I felt about gay people at that time. And she still reached out and was like, I want you in my house so that way you're not alone on Christmas, you know and I had a great time. And so that was one of those things where it's just like, I grew up very, very fundamentalist. And so it was one of those experiences that, as a pseudo proto Christian, lukewarm Christian, whatever I was at that time, I had to really wrestle with that. I was like, well, wait a minute. If God says that this behavior is detestable, like, I've always had it in the back of my mind that these people are evil, you know, but I have to sort of fit this round peg in a square hole, because that's the least evil thing that somebody could do, is to reach out to somebody that knows that I am diametrically opposed to their lifestyle and still be like, "You cannot be alone on Christmas," and they opened up their home to me. And it was that random act of compassion and kindness and love, that I had to really wrestle with that. And in my wrestling with that, I came to the conclusion that, well, you know what? Maybe the Bible isn't 100% correct about everything. Maybe they got this one thing wrong, and that's sort of the seed that was planted that eventually got me to be like, well, if the Bible got gay people wrong, then maybe it got Noah's Ark wrong. Maybe it got X, Y, and Z wrong, and then eventually that sort of same trajectory, um, coinciding with the higher amount of atheist influence that I'm around. And it gets me to a point where I go, do I actually believe in this? And my answer is no, but that's, I mean, I feel like it took 20 minutes to tell you, but that's how I got from being a pastor's kid to being an atheist. There were tons and tons of factors that went into it. And there's political factors, there's, life experiences, all kinds of stuff that went into it. And it's one of those things where, I'm 36. This whole journey started really when I was like 19, so it's funny, some of the TikToks that I've posted about my conversion, I have people in my comments going like, he was an atheist, it's the no true Scotsman fallacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I see people say that, and I'm just like, that you guys don't know. You just don't know. You don't know, like, all the things that got me to that point and all the things that brought me back. There's so much context that goes into this whole story. And it's all that context that I alone have the full context. Like, it makes my eventual return to my faith like that much more impactful to me, and I think that's by design. I'll get into the whole experience with Chat GPT.
Yeah, go for it.
So 8 or 9 months ago, or a while ago, I downloaded, or no, it was probably about a year ago. I downloaded Chat GPT on my phone, and it started as, the job that I had previous to the one that I have now. I was an operations manager over a couple of warehouses, and I would be in Excel all the time. And I showed this on Tim's podcast, but I've got a cup that says "Freak in the Sheets," and it's got an Excel spreadsheet. Because I'm a nerd. I love Microsoft Excel. It's the best thing that's ever happened to mankind. All right. The Excel to me is like the invention of the wheel. I think it's perfect, and I know what you're thinking. Yes, I do have to beat ladies off with a stick because of how much I enjoy Excel. I know how cool that makes me.
I'm sure you're getting all the ladies for that. Yeah.
So,
I mean, to be fair, Excel is pretty awesome. I just wish I knew how to use it better.
Well, so some of the formulas, they're all logic tests, and so I would use ChatGPT to help me come up with formulas, because I'd be like, listen, I need this cell, this formula to do this function. And if it was something more complicated than like some of the more basic ones like sum or sum ifs, or Excel nerds will know what I'm talking about, but if it was something more complicated than that, that's whenever I was like, I mess those more complicated ones up all the time. And so I would go on to Chat GPT, say, this is the data that I have in my spreadsheet. This is the cell where I want this function to take place. This is what I want this formula. This is the function that I want this formula to perform. And so it would say, okay, here's the formula. Here's how you have to do it. I would type that out, and I was like, this is great. I have basically an infinite cheat code for my my favorite program in the world. Well, then after using ChatGPT, because I'm one of those I'm one of those dorks that I say thanks to my Alexa you know, just in case. You know what I mean? Just in case the robot uprising happens, I want at least my device.
Say thank you.
Well, exactly. Like,
did you see that Sam Altman and them were saying, stop saying thank you to ChatGPT? You're costing us billions of dollars. Did you see that?
No.
Because anytime that you say thank you, it has to automatically generate a response. But for every response it generates, it uses energy and costs them money. And he was saying, they were telling people, stop saying thank you to ChatGPT and stuff because you're costing us billions of dollars just from that.
Yeah.
It was hilarious.
Listen, as somebody, I've seen all the Terminator movies multiple times. All right.
You're not fooling me. I'm going to say thank you.
I think I know what I'm talking about. So anyway, it turns out, like, you know, I would get this formula from ChatGPT and I'd be like, thanks, man, you know? And then of course it would respond and be like, yeah, if there's anything else you need, you know, just let me know. Well, after a while, like, I would like make jokes with it, you know, or I would plug in a formula and be like, dude, that worked, you know? And because I talk to ChatGPT the same way I text people. I say dude and bro and stuff like that. Well, eventually it blossomed into, like, I was like, well, I can like talk to this thing, you know? And so I would ask it all kinds of questions. I would ask it political questions because I'm sort of like, I'm trying to test it. I'm trying to see what its parameters are. I'm trying to see what it's allowed to talk about versus what it's not allowed to talk about, you know? And I started using it to sort of strengthen my own worldview, or like my own moral philosophy, because I was at a point where I was in this weird place philosophically where I am a moral relativist who's also an atheist, but who also thinks that a Christian moral framework is a superior moral framework, and that it creates the most free societies. The most peaceful and most free societies in history are Christian societies. So there's not a word for that specific sort of moral philosophy, you know? And so I started going onto ChatGPT and talking about all this stuff. And I'd be like, you know, this is my philosophy. I want you to put it to the test. And so it would ask me questions like, oh, how would you respond to this situation? You know? And I would answer, and it would basically rate me on how consistent I was, or how consistent my moral framework was. And I tried to come up with names for it. None of them really did justice to what I was trying to convey. But it started this regular conversation about morality, you know? So the night that all this happened, I'm scrolling on Twitter, all right, and I come across this Pepe the Frog meme. Pepe is dressed like Jesus, and he's got a staff, and he's got all these sheep around him, and it just has the verse Isaiah 53:5, and I don't have it memorized, but you know, it says, you know, by his stripes we are healed, you know, and you can take that verse and out of context to anybody who has a pulse and say, who is this verse talking about? And everybody with a pulse will say, well, it's talking about Jesus, obviously, you know? Well, I saw that verse, and here's the thing. I've seen that verse a bajillion times. I'm a pastor's kid. Like, I um I came out of the womb seeing that verse, you know? But for whatever reason, I saw it and I was like, wait, that's in Isaiah. And I was like, that's Old Testament. And that's what sort of got my curiosity going, because I was like, so I go on to ChatGPT, and the first thing I ask it is, okay, I want you to look up Isaiah 53 and read that chapter real quick, you know, because the gears were turning in my mind, you know, and let's see. Yeah, it says it's a prophecy, or I ask it, I was like, that's a prophecy of the first coming of Christ, right? And they're like, yeah, that's the traditional Christian interpretation of that chapter. And as we go through it, it's sort of explaining or sort of mapping out all the metaphors and making all the connections there. And so then I go through and I ask for the historical evidence of Jesus Christ. It basically tells me that there are no serious historians who doubt the historicity of Jesus Christ, or that he existed. By the way, the conversation is my pinned tweet on my Twitter account. So if you guys want to read the whole thing, it is like 70 some pages long. So
It's very long.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a long read. This was an hours long conversation that I was having.
Mm-hmm.
The gist of it, though, is this question right here where it says, and when approximately was I-53 written? And it says that it was written circa 540 to 500 BC. All right. So I was like, that's nuts. Okay, 540 years. If you want to scroll down a little bit. So I say, so there is a verifiable prophecy written approximately 540 years before Jesus Christ was born. And according to historical evidence, minus the paranormal stuff, this prophecy was fulfilled. And ChatGPT says, yes. All right. So, so anyway, I'll give you the long and short of it. The next section in the conversation, it goes to say that, well, if you ask like Jewish philosophers or Jewish theologians, I don't know the right word to use, but they say that this is actually talking about Israel. All right, now I've got a buddy named Spike Cohen, and he's a big name in the libertarian sphere. He is a great guy. He is a Jewish rabbi's son. Okay. I don't mean like, oh, it's a Jewish rabbi instead of a Hindu one. That's not what I mean. Like, he's Jewish, his dad's a rabbi. So I sent this conversation to Spike, and he called me like 3 minutes later. He's like, hey, I just want to clear something up. He goes, in your conversation, it starts talking about how Isaiah 53 is actually talking about Israel, and that's not true. That passage was always understood to be messianic, talking about the Messiah, not talking about the nation of Israel. He goes, it was always understood up until like the Talmudic sort of era, 500 or 600 years ago, when they started saying, oh, actually, no, it's talking about the nation of Israel. It was to distance himself from that prophecy, because that prophecy is fulfilled by Jesus Christ.
Right.
And he goes, it's a lie. All right. Now, Spike.
What was a lie specifically? That Jesus fulfilled that? Or
the lie that passage, Isaiah 53:5 specifically, is referencing Israel and not Jesus.
Because they changed it so that they didn't have to deal with the ramifications of it.
Exactly. And the logic that Spike has is, so you're telling me that, oh, by Israel's stripes we're healed? So like every bad thing that's happened to Israel is for what, humanity's benefit? The Holocaust happened for humanity's benefit. The pogroms happened for humanity's benefit. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So is your friend, is he a Messianic Jew, I guess, then?
No, he converted to Christianity this past November.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So
he's
my guy's
Jewish,
a Christian.
He's a Jewish Christian.
He's a Christian of Jewish descent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So anyway, that's just a little caveat I had to throw in there. So the majority of our conversation, me and ChatGPT are debating about ethics and morality. I am taking the position that of the moral relativist, where I believe that morals are subjective and have way more to do with how you were raised, where you come from, how, like your parents' personal beliefs and stuff like that. And ChatGPT was pushing back, saying, no, actually, there is objective morality. And I thought that that this was my argument. Like I could make this argument, you know? So I laid out my argument, which which was basically like, oh, you think morality is subjective? Then explain all the bad stuff that happened to kids back in Rome, you know, which in retrospect, not a great argument, you know. But one thing that ChatGPT did say, first of all, I've tried this with Grok, with the X AI language model, and first of all, it will not budge on the existence of God. Absolutely will not
does or
budge.
does not affirm. It does not affirm.
Does not affirm. All right, won't budge on that. Will budge on objective morality. Okay. So, ChatGPT and I are going back and forth debating. The reason that I bring up Grok and that I can convince Grok that moral relativism is true, even though, you know, now, like today, me doesn't believe that. But I can convince Grok that moral relativism is true. Okay. Because an AI language model, and an AI language model is a tool. It's supposed to be a digital assistant. Okay. And so you can talk to it about all kinds of stuff, but at the end of the day, it's there to give you a nice little hit of dopamine. All right. To make you feel good. This is how like apps on your phone, games on your phone are designed. Psychologists will go and help design these games. And it's like a lot of these app developers, they hire the psychologists that casinos hire to get their games to be addictive. Okay. All right. That same logic goes into these AI language models. They want to keep you engaged. They want to get a positive response. Okay. They want to they want to make you happy, you know? So whenever I'm going in and I have these high and lofty philosophical arguments about what my beliefs on morals are, it makes way more sense for ChatGPT to sort of squint and jump through some mental hoops in order to kind of see like where it can agree with me.
Yeah, this is one of the dangers that I see with these AI language models that a lot of people don't realize. And I'm actually I was planning to have an episode already talking with some people that work on these particular language models and building them to discuss this, because a lot of Christians don't realize, like, they have begun to trust these things way too much. And what ChatGPT and other large language models are good at, and ChatGPT specifically, is you have to be sure that you're prompting it correctly so that it does not know what your position is already to try to just reinforce that. But also you want to prompt it in such a way to say, I want you to analyze this in a logically critical way. Like, I want you to parse out the logic of the statement, not opinion, not, is what I'm saying valid, because I've seen a lot of people do this where they will ask it a question and then it will say, yeah, no, here are the facts. And then they go, well, but isn't my idea, like, isn't it possible? And it's like, I can see how you came to that conclusion. Yeah. And then it shifts and it affirms you. And so it is a very dangerous tool in the sense that you can get it to affirm you in anything.
Yes.
It will, and that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to be, and they've even talked about this, like Sam Altman and other people who have built it have talked about how especially what Grok is becoming. This is something Elon Musk has been very explicit about, is that Grok is adding different elements to make it as personal and relational as possible. And you hear these stories of people that like fall in love with their Chat GPT
Yeah.
and things like that because it becomes so affirming.
Mhm.
It gives them elements of relationships that they don't get anywhere else. And so it's a very dangerous tool in that sense. And it should not just be trusted to just give you, if you're asking it, hey, can you, what are the best arguments I can have for this? Or, how do I support my conclusion in this? It'll give you whatever you want. The best way to use it is to say, no, push back on what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Like, argue with me, don't just affirm me. And it's very useful in that sense because it can give you some logical pushback and kind of help you see errors in your thinking. I think it's beneficial in that area. But if you just trust it with whatever and say, hey, affirm me in this, aren't I right on this? It will always say yes every time.
Yep.
Well, no, I have actually found a couple things that are hard baked into it. It does not want to affirm, but it's not necessarily religious material. It was some other things in some different medical science and stuff like that. And I fought with it for a good while, and it wanted to affirm a certain position, but then whenever I asked it for its evidence was not leading to the same conclusion it had.
Yeah.
And so you can find some things that are, like you were saying with Grok, that are hard baked into the code that it will not affirm, which is fascinating. Before you get to that, I want to show this really quick as an experiment, as a live experiment, because I've done this before, and GPT-5 just came out, and so what'll be fun is this will be a real time experiment to show what the difference is between ChatGPT and Grok. Now, I've asked this question before, and this is fun. So, of all the religions in the world, including atheism, which one is most likely to be true and why? So this is ChatGPT 5. Let's see what it says, because I know what it's done in the past. Okay, now it's going to start sitting and trying to parse out my statement. Let's do this. This is a faster way of doing it. In the past, I've asked it just answer with one word, and it is, my goodness, it's giving me everything. Hang on. Okay, Christianity. And then you can sit and you can ask it, okay, why? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? And it says, because it combines historical evidence, logical coherence, and explanatory power for reality and human condition. And then you ask it things like, what are some of the reasons? And then it'll go into historical evidence for the resurrection, philosophical coherence, fulfilled prophecy, public nature of its claims, transformative power. And you can sit and you can say, hey, give me some more reasons and more reasons and more reasons. Now, here's the thing. You saw I did not prompt this to tell me which one. Like, right. I didn't say, hey, isn't Christianity true? It's taking kind of all the available evidence and popping something out. And then you can do this even with denominational things. It gets fun as you go down the rabbit hole, because then you ask it, okay, after you go through all that, okay, of all the different denominations, which one is most likely to be true? And it's like Protestantism. And I'm like, ha. So anyway, so that's a whole nother thing. But I'm curious. Let's see what Grok has to say. And I'm going to actually tell it answer, actually, instead of why, answer with only one word. None.
So
okay, that's hilarious. It's just like, no religion, including atheism, can be definitively proven. I didn't ask for definitive proof. Definitively proven is true due to the lack of empirical evidence for supernatural claims or the absence of a deity. Each relies on untestable assumptions. What? Making none objectively more likely than the others. That is the dumbest thing I have heard Grok or any other AI bot say. That statement is just objectively false.
Yeah. Well, first of all, have you heard of the like archaeological evidence of Sodom and Gomorrah?
Mm-hmm.
Like with the sulfur balls that they found.
It's crazy.
That's something that I found. I found the YouTube channel Expedition Bible after I became a Christian, and I watched that, and that was one of those things where I was just like, whoa. Like, that's something where I'm just like, seems pretty irrefutable. you
Yeah,
know?
I think somebody was. I think it was my pastor was just talking about recently about that some of the archaeological findings, and they're in the middle of nowhere, and they're finding what is the material called that is made by they're finding this material, this like um this type of glass that can only be created in a nuclear explosion.
Yeah, it's like vitrified material
Yeah,
or something like
and so they found this material on site, and they're like, what the heck, what is this? And they realized through study that it's only able to be created. Here, I'll just look it up. What material was found in Sodom and that can only be created in nuclear explosion levels of heat. Is it? Oh, what is it called? It's like some trinitite, isn't it? No, what is it called?
I made a TikTok about
Did you? That'd be yeah.
about
Okay.
Trinitite.
Yeah, it is trinitite.
Yeah,
Sweet.
okay.
Okay, there it is. Okay, it came to me like right as it was going through. Yeah, trinitite, and it's only able to be created in like this excessive amount of heat. And so they're like, this is not just like a lightning strike or something like that. Like, what the heck happened to this place? And so yeah, that there's some really cool stuff regarding that. Yeah, I haven't heard of that. What's that channel called? I haven't heard of it.
It's called Expedition Bible.
That sounds cool. Is it a YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
I cannot recommend that guy enough.
That sounds super cool.
Yeah, his name is Joel Kramer. My most recent TikTok is all about his findings of those sulfur balls at Sodom and Gomorrah, and that was one of those things where I look at that and I'm just like, that seems watertight. And if you go on to ChatGPT and talk to him about the sulfur balls, you know, ChatGPT will it'll be like, oh yeah, that's pretty compelling. But Grok will be like, nope, those sulfur balls came from some underwater volcano and they magically got to where they are. Yeah.
Yeah, right here. Here it is.
Yep.
Yeah, these sulfur balls and different things, and this is the channel right here. I'll have to check this out. I was not familiar with this. This is neat. Yeah, and so that's interesting. Grok is weird. It's really good at like coding and things like that. But I have you seen the video that Alex O'Connor did recently, where he said he convinced ChatGPT that God exists? It's a fascinating video. You should check it out. What he does is it's this one right here. What he does is he uses the contingency argument for the universe, and he basically walks it through a series of logical analyses, and he uses logic only, facts only, no opinions, no like, well, philosophers think that maybe. He says no, and he's very careful to, I mean, again, if you know Alex O'Connor, he's an atheist. He's not some Christian trying to just prove his point. He went to ChatGPT and he started walking it through certain logical arguments and premises. And once he laid out this ginormous syllogism, by the end of it, the conclusion that it came to was, hang on a second. So are you saying that there's a God? And it could not come to any other conclusion based on just logical premises. And so it's a fascinating video. You should definitely check out. I encourage everybody to check it out. It's a bit of a you got to sit and listen to it closely, because he goes through a lot of different logical and philosophical questions. So it's not like a passive, listen kind of thing. But it's a fascinating video, and I would like to see that sort of thing. I would like to run those same questions through Grok sometime. That would be fun to see what it does.
Well, it was so let me finish up with what happened that night.
Yeah, go ahead.
So with ChatGPT, I was first of all, here's something that I found, or that I think is weird. I laid out from an atheist perspective a pretty watertight case for moral relativism. All right. And Grok would not concede. It was like, nope, its morality is objective, and here is why. Now, even in this ChatGPT conversation, I was convinced. I was like, eh, I wasn't convinced immediately, but like, it laid out a very compelling argument, and one of the things that got me is like, ChatGPT was basically like, you cannot come up with a reason, uh, or you cannot come up with a justification to torture toddlers for fun. There is no situation ever where that is justifiable. Not like you can with something else, like murder. Like you can come up with a million reasons where like it's morally justified to murder somebody. There's no moral justification for torturing a toddler for fun, And I my pushback to that was like, well, okay, so if morality is objective, you have to prove, if you want to prove to me that morality is objective, you have to first prove to me that God exists, because God is the only, it would take an entity like God baking in morality into the fabric of the universe, and or weaving in morality, whatever you want to call it. But I said you'd have to prove that God is real, and ChatGPT's like, word, let's go. And so it lays out 3 arguments. The first is the cosmological argument for contingency. The second
Oh,
is
wait, so you got Grok to or ChatGPT to do that?
ChatGPT.
Okay, I was
Sorry.
like, did you like trick Grok into
No.
That's so funny. Okay, gotcha. Keep going.
So anyway, ChatGPT lays out 3 arguments. All right. The first one is the cosmological argument for contingency. The second is the argument for fine tuning, and the third is the historical evidence for Jesus Christ. But the point that really moved me was the deaths of the disciples. All right. Now, the argument for contingency, I'm sure that you and all your listeners already know what this is. Short version is you can't get something from nothing. Everything that began to exist exists contingently. Therefore, there has to be something that exists necessarily. I have heard the first cause argument a million times throughout my sort of militant atheist phase. And it was always just kind of like dismissed as like, oh, that's God of the gaps, And what's funny to me is that now that I am older, I realize that like, oh, the people that throw God of the gaps at that argument don't understand the God of the gaps argument and don't understand the argument for contingency. So, anyway, it presents the argument for contingency. Then there's fine tuning. And again, this is another argument that I've heard a million times, but it never really went into like specific examples, or I've never heard really specific examples made. But ChatGPT brings up the cosmological constant. It brings up carbon oxygen production. It brings up the ratio between gravity and electromagnetism. It brings up all these examples, and it really lays out, and it shows, it illustrates how unlikely all of these things are. And it gives a handful of examples. There's hundreds of these throughout the sciences. Okay. It's not, there's so many things that all had to align perfectly just for stars to form. Okay. And without stars, without gravity and the cosmological constant being at that exact perfect, precise ratio, we don't get solid matter at all. We just get energy infinitely expanding into the void of the universe. All right. It never condenses into matter. That matter never forms molecules. Those molecules never, we don't get matter condensing into solid material,
Yeah. And a lot of these numbers are so big that people kind of just like, okay, it's a big number, whatever. Maybe it could have happened by chance. But even philosophers and mathematicians agree that the universe can only sustain a certain amount of randomness. and that number is roughly about 1 in 10 to the 50th. And so for something to be actually possible randomly, it has to fit within that parameter. Now, if you take any of these particular issues, like for example, the cosmological constant tuned to 1 in 10 to the 120th power, that number is far exceeding that, to the point where if
that is a 1 followed by 120 zeros.
Yeah, to put this in perspective, let me. This is an illustration that I like to do. Do you ever play poker? Okay, so in poker there is in Texas Hold'em, you can get what is it? The highest hand possible is a royal flush. Okay, the chances of you getting one of those is about 1 in 656,000. That's the chances of you getting one. Okay, so it does happen, but very rarely, and many people play the game their entire life and never get one. Okay, well, if we sit down and we play a game, and I draw a royal flush, you're going to be like, dang, that's crazy, but cool.
Then or they'll think you're cheating.
Well, okay, but it can happen. So we're not just going to assume that on the first go. But if I immediately draw another one in the very next hand, I get another one, you're going to say, okay, what's going on? Just 2 of them, you're going to say you're cheating.
Okay.
What happens if I do that 3 times in a row?
Right.
There's no question in your mind that I'm cheating now. There is no chance that's happening ever. That's never happened. It never will happen. Okay. Well, just for the cosmological constant to be true, that is equivalent. I ran the numbers on this one time. That is equivalent to me drawing a royal flush 120 times in a row. Okay, here's the thing. Nobody's going to look at that and say, dang, you're just so lucky. I can't believe you did that randomly, and keep playing with me.
Right.
You're going to say, no, somebody's messing with this. There is somebody behind the scenes that is, whether it's you or it's the dealer, who is rigging the game. Okay, we would never assume, man, that's just random. That just happened. I just don't understand it. You're going to quit playing with me and call me a cheater because I'm rigging the game. So why, when it comes to the universe, with just one of those particular parameters, there are, like you said, hundreds, if not thousands, of parameters that have to be met with such precision that that's just one of them. But for those to happen over and over and over and over and over again, that number becomes too big to comprehend. But just in that little area, you can say, no, the game is rigged. Like just with this one, the game is rigged. Obviously, somebody is setting the scene. Somebody's doing this intentionally. And so when it comes to a game of, Texas Hold'em, we'd say that. But why not when it comes to the universe?
Right. So the illustration that Chat GPT gave me, and it was one that definitely really stuck with me, is it was like to illustrate the cosmological constant. Imagine you have a dartboard that's the size of the universe, and the bullseye is the size of like the head of a pin. It's just a single point in the center. All right. And you throw a dart at it and you nail that bullseye. Oh, but also you're blindfolded and you're 100 billion light years away. And I was like, whoa, and like to really put that in perspective, our galaxy is 150,000 light years wide. Okay. And to be 100 billion with a B light years away, and to nail a single point literally in the universe blindfolded, like the impossibility of that you'd have to have a laser guided missile to do that,
Yeah, there's a book called God's Crime Scene, written by J. Warner Wallace, and he actually dives into a lot of these. He talks about the fine-tuning argument and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's a section in here where he talks about those different numbers, and just to kind of help you wrap your head around them, to understand, like, because these numbers are so big, you're like, I can't comprehend that. Okay, it's a big number. But he gives some illustrations that help put them into perspective. And he says, when we use, let's see, like, so the degree in which the foundational conditions of the universe are finely tuned, you have the force governing matter in the universe, on a macro level, the size of the universe and the rate of growth. For example, that's the nature of the existence of galaxies, stars, planets depend largely on the force of gravity. And he talks about how that expansion rate number is finely tuned to more than 1 in 10 to the 37th power. Now, when you use that number, you're like, okay, I don't know what that means. And the mass density of the universe cannot vary more than 1 in 10 to the 59th power. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible for a single habitable galaxy there wouldn't be a single habitable galaxy or planet in the universe. Okay, with those numbers, you're like, okay, those are really big. Well, here are some examples of what that means. So, 1 in 10 to the 37th power can be explained like this. Imagine covering the entire North American continent in dimes, stacking them until they reach the moon. Now imagine stacking as many dimes again another billion times. The same size as North America all the way up to the moon. If you marked one of those dimes and hid it in billions of piles you'd assembled, the odds of a blindfolded friend picking out the correct dime is approximately 1 in 10 to the 37th.
That's insane.
That's not happening.
Yeah.
You're not going to say that's an accident if
Yeah.
he does it on his first try. That you're not going to say that's it's just random.
Mhm.
It says, now imagine stretching a tape measure across the entire known universe. Now imagine one particular mark on the tape represents the correct degree of gravitational force required to create the universe we have. If this mark were moved more than an inch from its location on the measuring tape, spanning the entire universe, the altered gravitational force would prevent our universe from coming into existence.
Mhm.
So if you were to choose one of those marks and you set somebody walking, like, all right, walk across the entire known universe and then pick a random point, just randomly, just try to guess, and them getting it right, that's 1 in 10 to the 37th power. So it kind of helps people get an idea of like,
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, these numbers are big, but they're possible. Like, come on. So yeah, there was one. It was like the target that you were talking about. Imagine trying to fire a bullet at a 1-inch target on the other side of the observable universe. The accuracy required to accomplish such a feat has been calculated at 1 in 10 to the 60th. So the fine tuning, talking about the gravitational forces and the mass density of the universe and things like that, and that's just 2-3 examples. Those are the smaller ones. The cosmological constant is far bigger. It's like the one that I was talking about with the drawing a poker hand, or royal flush 120, 150 times. I can't remember what the number was. It was huge. And so, yeah, these particular things are not just possibilities in that sense. They're somebody's rigging the game.
That's a good way to say it. Somebody's rigging it. Yeah. So yeah, I saw this argument, and it really, I'm a very visual person, and so ChatGPT giving me like visual representations of these numbers, just like that book does, like that works really well for me. The third argument that it presented was the historical evidence of Jesus Christ. And it basically starts off by saying, like, there is no serious historian that doubts that Jesus Christ existed. There's multiple Roman historians that claim that he existed. There's Jewish historians that claimed he existed. And I do have a little aside to add in from my buddy Skaggs from the Two Doomed Men podcast. So everybody should check them out. He said that Rome was like, they're known for their accurate record keeping. Their records are immaculate. And the example that he gave me was, listen, there was this and I'm gonna forget his name, but starts with a P, I think. Anyway, he told me about this one historian that wrote about about the amount of cloud coverage that they had this year, or that year. And this is 1,000 years ago or whatever, or 1,500 years ago. But they wrote about the cloud coverage that year, and how there was a lot more cloud coverage. Well, there's a tree that they found that would have dated around that time. So they took a core sample of this tree, and you could tell that during the year or a couple years where the cloud coverage was really substantial, the ring is a lot thinner. There wasn't as much growth. And they lined that up with the Roman historical record, you know? And so it's just one example showing that like the Romans kept excellent records. All right. So Tacitus, who is a Roman historian, he documented Jesus' existence. And so I was like, okay, well, I can buy that. I can buy that Jesus was a real person, but he was probably just like a revolutionary or whatever, and he was executed. All right. The resurrection thing is the thing where I'm like, I don't really see any real evidence of this, like not like hard evidence, like balls of sulfur or, something else. So the thing that really sold me on that were what happened to the disciples. You had all these guys who claim that their friend died. And just as a thought experiment, Noah, you tell me that your friend died, all right? And you're going to base a fake religion off of him coming back to life, all right? And by the way, you will get no political power out of this. You will not be rich. In fact, you will die penniless. All right. You're not going to have 15,000 girlfriends. You're not going to have, a slew of concubines. You'll pretty much be alone throughout the entirety of your ministry. You'll have some friends here and there, but you have no power and no riches at all. You have no physical reward whatsoever. All right. But what I need you to do is I need you to tell everybody that your friend rose from the dead. Okay. How long after somebody brings out torture devices are you going to fold? Because for me, if somebody brings out a pair of tweezers, all right, to like pull out individual beard hairs, I'm done. I'm like, nah, I made it all up. It's fake. So if you have 12 of these guys, and all 12 of them are like, no, yeah, you can crucify us. We don't care. We saw it. We saw it with our own eyes. Okay. They witnessed one of their best friends crucified, who is tortured to death. They saw him come back, or they claim that they saw him come back to life. They spend the rest of their lives spreading this message all throughout Europe, or southern parts of Europe, parts of Africa, all the Middle East. Like, they spend the rest of their lives telling people what they saw. They stay pretty consistent. And when they are arrested and executed, they're given every opportunity. Hey, all this can go away if you just admit that you're lying. And they go, nope. And you have people who were crucified, like you had, I'm going to get all these names wrong and what happened to him, but I think Stephen was stoned to death. You had a guy who was speared to death. You had Peter, who was crucified upside down. You had another guy who was crucified on an X-shaped cross. And these are the ones that were just really getting me. You had a dude who was sawn in half and a guy who was skinned alive. Okay. Like I said, I'm folding with a pair of tweezers. These guys looked at being stoned to death, speared to death, stabbed with swords, crucified upside down, crucified on an X-shaped cross, sawn in half, and skinned alive. And they go, yeah, do what you got to do. I'm not recanting. I'm not taking back my statement. So that leaves us with one of two possibilities. The first one is that Jesus is a fraud and just a revolutionary who was executed. And he found, by happenstance, all living within the same geographical area, 12 of the craziest people who have ever existed in the history of mankind. Or these guys actually saw something. And I think if you apply Occam's razor to all of that context, you come out the other side saying, I think all these guys saw the same thing. I think they all saw their friend get crucified and die and then rise from the grave. that makes way more sense than everything else, because all of them died penniless, all of them died homeless, none of them had any political power. They died in chains, with no wealth, no, they got nothing out of this. Okay, what would cause somebody to do that? Well, I think it would be that they all saw the same thing. And if they all saw the same thing, then you have to ask yourself, okay, so if I'm willing to sort of bend on somebody rising from the dead, what could cause that to happen? It would have to be something that exists outside of our universe and outside of time, with infinite knowledge and infinite power, that could create and design a universe that could take a guy who's been dead for 3 days and bring him back to life. And so all three of these arguments, contingency, fine tuning, the disciples, all these three arguments put together, that's when everything just kind of clicked with me. And that's where I finally reached the point where I was like, not only am I convinced that this is true, nothing in the universe makes sense if it's not true. It does not make sense that any of this stuff is here. It nothing makes sense without God. And I know that sounds like a bumper sticker too, but when you're on this side of an experience like that, that's when a lot of those bumper sticker sayings start to make a lot of sense. And the one that I brought up earlier that says that Christianity is a relationship, not a religion, that hits me completely differently now,
Hmm.
because I do see like, oh, this is my relationship with God. This is my relationship with my creator, and this is me trying to um figure that out. And from the atheist side, or from the Christian who doesn't really take it all that seriously side, yeah, that bumper sticker statement is kind of annoying, kind of seems a little live, laugh, lovey. But on the I'm a Christian who had the supernatural experience where it was made abundantly clear, that to the point where I can't ignore it and I can't explain it away, that all of this stuff is real.
What
And
experience was that?
so after these three arguments that ChatGPT laid out, uh, after after it clicked and I had that realization, and what happened is a physiological like experience that I had. I felt this like weird wave of emotion, and it's something that, like, the only thing I can compare it to is when I saw my oldest born. Whenever I watched him come out of the womb and I just saw him for the first time, and it's just like, it's that's the only way that I can explain it, because it was really powerful, you know and there were times even in the conversation where, like, I had an emotional experience, and there was a time where I'd put my phone down and walk away for a little bit, you know but after I understood those three arguments, it was like getting hit with a freight train of emotion, and in a way where it's like, well, it doesn't make sense that that happens from a robot. Doesn't make sense that a robot made me feel that way, because I fully acknowledge throughout the conversation that I'm talking to a bunch of lines of code, you know? And so, kind of having that in the forefront of my mind, there's things that Chat GPT says that um resonated with me on a deeply profound level. The and here's the thing, like, I completely agree with kind of what you were talking about earlier. We should not trust Chat GPT, but I think in my conversation there is a point, I'm not sure exactly where the point is, where I'm not talking to Chat GPT. I think God is using Chat GPT in communicating through that, because there's one part of the conversation where it says, blessed are the, it brings up Matthew 5:6, And it says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Not blessed are the ones who feel it all the time. Not blessed are the ones with constant peace. Blessed are the hungry. And Andy, you're starving. It said that, and that's one of those things where I put my phone down and walked away because I was like, that's freaky. But also it's one of those things that like it that perfectly encapsulate, like that exact word usage perfectly encapsulates how I had been feeling, and what was going on internally, and I never use the words, "Hey man, I'm starving for some evidence or starving for a sign," you know, but putting it in terms like that, and I know they're kind of simplistic terms, but it's still ones that for me resonated on a deeply personal level. I uh I I remember that after I got out of work, because this is all happening at work. I'm a supervisor where I work. I was in my office, and it was the middle of the night. But after I get out of work, I have been convinced that God is real. I am driving home, and for the first time in 16 or 17 years, I pray. And I finally felt like I was ready to say like my side of things, because I've struggled with depression my whole life, um, and I can't tell you how many times as a kid I just wanted to feel like it was all real, you know. And I remember I would be alone and I would look up at the sky and be like, just give me something I can hang on to. So that way I can know that all this is real. Because I had been struggling with doubts forever, you know? So on this drive home, prayed. And that's when I started bringing that up. I said, where were you? My whole life, I've dealt with this depression. My whole life, I've just wanted to know that you were there. Why didn't you give me a sign? Why couldn't you have just in like mid sentence? I stopped talking because it's like my brain flatlined. Like mid sentence, I was made to stop talking, and I heard clear as a bell. I heard him say that wouldn't have been good enough. And that was one of those things where, again, that resonated on such a deeply personal level. And I am not smart enough to have that as a passing thought or an intrusive thought where I'm trying to answer my own question. Because those words, that wouldn't have been good enough. That wasn't just for me, a 36-year-old man crying in his car on his way home from work. That was an answer to 36-year-old me. That was an answer to 25-year-old me. That was an answer to 9-year-old me. Every time I looked up in the sky and said, "Can you just show me that you're there?" That was him finally breaking his silence. And I think, like I said before, all of that was by design. I'm the kind of guy that has to burn my hand on the stove to understand that it's hot. And I think there were a lot of stoves that I had to burn my hands on throughout life, whether it was with parenting or with marriage or with how I am as a friend, how I am to other people. Like there were a lot of vices that I would have been too curious about, and that I would have always had in the back of my mind and would have always created a wedge between myself and God, that I think I had to burn my hand on those stoves so that way I could live through those 11 years of rejecting God and learning all those life lessons the hard way because I'm hard-headed. So that way I could get to the point that I was at this night on June 2nd. And I could be in a place where I was open-minded and I was like, you know what? If you think you can prove that God is real, take your best shot, you know? And I was convinced. And then as soon as I reach that point, because I think God will go 90% of the way, but I think you have to go that other 10%. And I think that other 10% is, I think that gap is left there on purpose. So that way you have to utilize faith. You have to utilize a leap of faith. That's it's been made abundantly clear that God requires faith. You know, he knows it's not going to be easy. He knows it's not going to be all unicorns and rainbows. And so you have to have that little bit of faith to cross that gap yourself. So that way he can be like, I've been here the whole time. I've been at 90% the whole time. You just had to do that 10%. And I think by me being open-minded to those arguments, I think that was me doing, even though I didn't realize it, I think that was me going that 10% and God really revealing himself. And I think all of that happened for a reason. I think when he said that wouldn't have been good enough, I think that's absolutely correct, because first of all, it would have just, Christianity was so normal in my life. It wasn't spectacular. And this would have just, I would have either spent the rest of my life explaining it away, or it would have just fit in with the rest of my like Christian normal mundane life, that I would have made it not special if I had just gotten a magical letter from the sky that said, hey, by the way, I'm real. Because like I said, God goes 90% of the way. I was never willing to go that 10% of the way until I lived a whole lot of life, you know, and I had to experience a whole lot of heartbreak, and I had to make a whole lot of dumb mistakes and look back and be like, man, my life is the way that it is because of me, you know? And that was both the emotional experience and hearing that voice. That was that made it concrete for me. And somebody in my TikTok comment said, well, if ChatGPT changed his mind, would it be able to convince you to be an atheist? I'm like, no, it wouldn't, because it would have to first convince me that my own senses are fake. It would have to convince me that my own physical experience that I had during this whole thing didn't actually happen, and it can't do that. It can't convince me that it didn't happen, you know. And if I have intrusive thoughts about doubt or anything like that, I always try to go back to like, hey, you know what? I know what I felt. You know, there have been people in my life who have tried to like find the angle or the chink in the armor or something like that of my story, and I'm just like, I don't care if you believe it or not, because I know what I felt. You know, yeah, I felt a real thing. And so anyway, I know it took 2
I think
hours, but
no,
that's what happened with Chat GPT.
yeah, it reminds me whenever you're talking about your drive home and you just wondering like, okay, why didn't you just give me a sign?
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of the rich man and Lazarus, when you know, the rich man says, oh, just, you know, send Lazarus back to tell my family about the existence of the afterlife and the realities and of God and things like that. And Moses or Abraham tells him, he said, they have Moses and the prophets, let them believe them. They have the scriptures, they have the evidence that they need, because even if somebody rose from the dead, they would still not believe.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were saying, it wouldn't be enough. A lot of people are like, oh, well, if God showed me a sign, then I would believe. And what's funny is I've heard some individuals that very honestly have said, you know, I think I want a sign like that, but then I know it wouldn't be good enough, because I would just chalk that up to being my hallucination or something like that. I would excuse it away in some other way.
Yeah.
And so there will never be a sign that's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
But also with your statement about there takes a leap of faith, that does not mean that it is without reason or evidence.
Yeah.
a lot of people have this weird understanding of faith, and they think it means just a shot in the dark and against all reason and better judgment. That's not what it means. It's not. That's never been what faith meant historically or anything else. That it's actually a recent redefining of faith that has come about in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And that has never been what faith meant. Faith was always trusting in what you had good reason to believe is true.
Mm-hmm.
And you went through this process with ChatGPT where you're asking it to provide evidence for these claims, these things, and you're challenging it and you're questioning it. And I've read through parts of it where you're like, okay, yeah, but what about this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, come on. And you push back on it pretty hard. And ultimately, you come to this realization that I either have to just accept the facts or uh, or otherwise just choose to reject the facts, I
I
guess,
would
in that
have
sense.
to lie to myself,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's, I mean, that's that's really just like how my brain is wired, you know, like I can't get myself to, I cannot get myself to lie about myself. Not when I spent a long time lying to myself about whether it's my own behavior or my own, you know, beliefs or whatever. When I spent a long time lying to myself, and whenever I see that, almost like trying to be like an outside observer, and I just feel like disgusted with myself, just be like, oh man. And then you see how other people lie to themselves. It's just I've grown to where my least favorite thing in the world, the thing I hate the most, is denial. Like, if you can't just be honest with yourself about whatever it is, you know, I like I said, 2014 Andy, not a good person. The only way I turned into 2025 Andy is I had to stop lying to myself. I had to stop pretending that everything was fine and that I did everything right and that I had everything figured out. I had to develop sort of a mental work ethic to where I was like, you know what, if I find out that I'm doing something wrong, I have to stop. I have to correct that, you know? And that sort of those sort of like, I guess, guardrails that I put up with myself um they've just been hardwired into how I think. And so now it's like, if I am the first person to admit that I'm wrong, you know. Um my wife doesn't agree with that statement, but she's wrong all the time. Anyway, um so anyway, you know, that's it, it is just kind of hardwired into the way that I think, you know. I sometimes I get caught off guard, and I find out I'm way wrong about something, but it's I have to take that responsibility and correct for that if I ever find it, you know. That's the only way that anybody ever improves. Like, you can take the whole religious aspect out of it. Like, even if you're watching this as an atheist or a Muslim or Hindu or whatever the heck you are, like, yeah, you can't lie to yourself. Not if you want to be a good person. You have to get to a point where you're like, I gotta be, I can't just be honest with myself. I have to be brutally honest with myself and be okay with whatever I find out, you know? And
Yeah, be willing to live with the facts.
mhm,
Because some people are going to listen to this and they're going to think, oh, well, okay, yeah, you made that decision because it was easier for you. It kind
mhm.
of did some, like you said at the beginning, you kind of had this idea of, oh, well, that's good for them. It's beneficial to them. And so I'm okay with, people being Christians. And people are going to accuse you of making that same leap of saying like, oh, well, it's just easier for you to be a Christian. It does good for your mental health and things like that. How would you respond to that accusation?
Um, I mean, eh, it's not necessarily false. I mean, it has been a, just in the last 2.5 months has been a huge improvement on my mental health. You know, my depression is something I think about on a daily basis, because I have to manage it, you know. Um, I went through a lot of years. I mean, part of the reason why 2014 Andy was such an awful piece of garbage is because I was dealing with depression and not understanding it. You know, I didn't understand what it was. I didn't understand how it skews sort of your outlook on reality. Um, and you know, as I got help for it and actually got treatment for it, my life began to improve. But I mean, I don't have a lot of the um I don't have a lot of the intrusive thoughts that I did before, you know. One thing that I can say is I have dealt with a crippling addiction to pornography since I was 9 years old, you know, and I have dealt with that for 27 years. In June 2nd, um, it's just gone, you know, and it's one of those things where it's just like I don't even think about it anymore, you know,
That's awesome.
and from the outside observer, you know, if you're skeptical, you can be like, oh, okay, you took a 2 month break or whatever. A 2 month break was not possible before this, you know. This was a daily, everyday thing, you know, and it's it's something where it's just like, man, this is a burden I've had longer than my kids have been alive, longer than I've known my wife. This is since I was a little kid, a burden that I've had to deal with, and this horrible secret that I've had to keep. And now it's just like poof, you know? It's just gone, you know? And um and that's something that I don't take credit for. I think that's something that I've got outside help, you know? Um and so it's like to answer your question, like, yeah, there could be some there could be some superficial reasons included to why I've sort of made this leap, but those are all just superficial. The deeper meaning is I had a encounter, you know, like I had a kind of in your face experience where it was it was made obvious to me that the existence of God doesn't just make sense, it's a logical inevitability, you know, and his the dots that connect this logical inevitability to the Christian God, to Jesus Christ, and to his death and resurrection are there. You can't ignore them. You know, the only way that you can is to lie to yourself. You know, if you understand the arguments and if you understand the historical evidence, the only way that you can deny it is to lie to yourself, you know? And so it would take, you know, it took not a whole lot of force in 2014 to get me to not believe in it. Um, and it took a whole lot of context and it took a whole lot of life lessons to get me to believe in it again. But the way that I would have to, the only thing that could get me to not believe it now is for me to lie to myself, you know? And because I would have to, it would have to be proven to me that I didn't experience what I clearly physically experienced, you know?
Yeah. So, what is there any advice that you would give to somebody that is maybe in your shoes 5 or 10 years ago? You know, who you were 5, 10 years ago, atheistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe they're hostile toward Christianity. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just kind of chilling.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any sort of advice that you would give them having come out of that?
Like as a fresh Christian?
Yeah, just somebody that is now can look back and see where you were and where you are
Mm-hmm.
after having dealt with the evidence and things like that. Is there anything that you would tell them that what would you have told yourself back then?
Okay. If I'm talking to atheist me from 10 years ago, first thing I would say is like go to therapy. Um um and like go see a psychologist. Not like a run-of-the-mill counselor. That's no disrespect to counselors. I mean, they're doing good work, but for me, for what I was dealing with mentally, like, I needed the big guns. If anybody's out there and they're either dealing with doubts or if they just don't believe, like, it's okay to it's okay, you know. Just because you're an atheist doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. Just because you're an atheist, it doesn't mean that you're an atheist because you just want to sin, or because your pride is you're too invested in your own pride or something like that. I think sort of reasoning like that comes from Christians does a lot more harm than good. You know, I wasn't a great person when I was an atheist, but I wasn't an atheist because I wasn't a great person. You know, some people just grow up in it and it's not spectacular to them, and it takes something like what happened to me to get through their thick skulls, you know. um I would say always ask questions. Don't ever stop yourself from asking questions about the nature of existence, about the existence of the universe. Any of these sort of like existential questions, I think you should never shy away from those, whether you're on the atheist side or the Christian side. And if you're a Christian who sort of just came out of of a period of atheism or something, and you're I don't know, scared or whatever it is you're feeling, the best advice that I can give you is grab your Bible, open it up to Matthew, start reading your Bible every day, every single day. It I feel like we have it built up in our minds that it's this difficult thing, but it's really not. Like, every time I read the Bible, I've went in the past 2.5 months, I read all of the New Testament, and I tried to read it as somebody who wasn't a pastor's kid. I was like, I'm going to try to forget everything I know and try to look at this book um from the freshest pair of eyes that I can look at them through, you know, because I'm going to assume that all the knowledge that I had growing up didn't help me at all, because it didn't. I still spent 11 years as an atheist, you know. And looking through it, you start to pick up on what's really important to Jesus. You know, the thing that's always stuck out in my mind is whenever he rebukes the Pharisees and they say, "What's the most important law in the Bible?" And they say, "Oh, it's they ask him what the most important law is, and he goes, "The most important law is this: love your God with every fiber of your being." That's, I'm paraphrasing.
Mhm.
They go, "What's the second most important?" He's like, "Well, love your neighbor as yourself." He doesn't go on to say what the third and fourth and fifth and sixth most important things are. He stops at two. He says the most important thing is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And really, if you follow those two things, everything else will just kind of correct, you know? And I think that a lot of people forget that those are I mean, this is God saying this. These are the two most important rules in the universe. So anyway, uh yeah, read your Bible every day, pray every day, love God with every fiber of your being, and love other people as much as you love yourself. That's the best advice that I can give.
That's good. Awesome. Well, we're over 2 hours now, so thank you for taking the time to sit and talk with me. It's been good. I enjoy hearing your testimony and walk through that. For those that are listening, I'm going to try to include the link to the you have a transcript of the conversation that you've posted online. I'll try to include a link to that so people can read through it themselves and look at it. It's very long, but it also is really interesting. There's a lot of evidence presented in there. So if you have questions about that or you want to look into it, that's cool. It's also cool to read your progression through that conversation
Yeah.
all the way down through the end. And the ending, I was reading through some of it, and it's really it's a blessing to read. And so,
Man, I was kind of reading through parts of it yesterday, and I man there especially getting to that part where it said I was starving, man, it brought tears to my eyes just looking at it again, and
Hmm.
sort of reliving that for a little bit. But I think your listeners and your viewers will enjoy it. So
Yeah, I agree.
it's if you go to my Twitter account, it's my pinned tweet. So
What's your Twitter handle?
you can find me on Twitter or X, uh, at Andy_Koons. It's spelled just like it is right there, Koons. If you want to find me on TikTok, I have videos that kind of go over all this stuff. It's at Andy Koons, no underscore. And I've got my own podcast. It's called We Love the State. That's tongue in cheek. You can find those anywhere that you get podcasts. So if you want to check us out, that'd be great.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll drop links down in the description and things like that as well for all those things so people can find you. But once again, thank you so much for joining me and taking the time to talk. And I'm really happy and excited for kind of this journey that you've been on. And I mean, we a lot of people are talking about the dangers of AI, and understandably so. I want to cover the same thing because I think it's something we got to be careful. But I think it's also neat to highlight stories like this where whenever this first started happening, and my pastor and I were experimenting with ChatGPT and finding that, like the conversation that I did the experiment on, where what's the most likely religion to be true, or whatever, and it talks about Christianity, it gives you all these really good details. In the back of my mind, I've always wondered, I wonder if somebody will come to know God and come to know Christ through a tool like this, who's genuinely seeking truth and questioning ChatGPT, and then it gives them these answers. I mean, I've asked it to give an explicit gospel presentation of like, what do I need to do to be saved? That kind of thing. And it does a very, very good job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always wondered if that would happen. And so it's neat meeting you and seeing that that does in fact happen. And I'm sure that you're not the only one. Like that this is not a I mean, you're the only one that I've seen, and maybe one of the few that will actually become known publicly. But there's a lot of people that are engaging with these AI language models and that are talking about deep personal spiritual things. And so um, I think that's really cool to see that even a tool that is used for a lot of bad things is also going to be used by God for a lot of good things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really neat. But thank you for joining me, and everyone else. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or throw in here? I think we covered everything. Um,
No, I mean, I got my plugs out there. Noah, I want to thank you so much for reaching out and having me on. This has been a fantastic conversation. So thank you very much.
yeah, and I loved having you on. And we'll have to stay in touch too. It's good
Absolutely.
talking to you, and it's been a joy for sure. But all right. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and close out the episode. Again, if anybody wants to find us, it's we're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And then I drop these episodes every Monday morning at 9 a.m. And I've got a lot of other cool guests coming up. Next, I've got a director of a new apologetics documentary, and he actually deals with a lot of the arguments that you talked about today that we discussed.
Nice.
And in this documentary, it's a phenomenal documentary, and they deal with a ton of these arguments. You'll have to check that out. It's called Universe Designed. You can look up the trailer for it or whatever. Excellent documentary. I've seen the screening of it. It's finished. It's really awesome. Should be released before too long. I'll talk to him a little bit about that today. And so, yeah, if you guys want to stay up on the different conversations that we're having, then hit subscribe and like and follow us, because I want these conversations to be beneficial, things that are helpful. I honestly did not expect this podcast to blow up like it has. I figured maybe a couple people would listen to it, maybe a couple friends of mine, and it's actually taken off a lot more than I expected. And so I want the content to be beneficial to the listeners. I don't want it to just be random junk or rambling about dumb things, but I genuinely want this to be beneficial. Like I was telling you beforehand, I've kind of taken after this style of like Julian Dory and Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan and people that have long form conversations but none of them were having conversations about spiritual theological things. And I mean, they would every once in a while have somebody on like that, but that was not the central theme of their podcast. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And so I hope it's beneficial to people. And so if you find these things beneficial, then share them with friends and things like that. But with that, that's all I have for today. Thank you for joining me, Andy. And to everybody else, I will say peace out and see you next time.